how much longer can Russia keep up its ineffective attacks in Bakhmut? Is it finally running out of soldiers to throw at the Ukrainian forces? How are they getting more? And do we finally have a timeline for Ukraine's counteroffensive? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's March 30th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay. First, let's take a look at the control map. Biggest news is no news. This is sort of shocking given that, again, we've seen very, very, very limited progress in the last several days, especially around Bakhmut. You can see I'm working us through the previous map, and you can see that basically this week, Russian forces have made almost no advances into the city. They've been trying, of course, to peel Ukrainians away from the defense around the bank of the Bakhmutka. But it's just increasingly hard for them to achieve any battlefield effects, despite the fact that even Russia itself has finally started to have to use economy of force, right? They're focusing on Avdiivka and Bakhmut. I think they may still be holding out hope that they can pull it off. But the volume of attacks has dropped precipitously across the front lines. And you guys can see that basically this combat is concentrated in Bakhmut and Avdiivka, but even that concentration is fairly limited. You can see here, right, Russian forces are again attempting to push into Bakhmut city center with minimal success. And again, you're seeing a higher volume of attacks as they try to create a cauldron around Avdiivka. But that's it. Those are their two focuses at this point. And you guys who have been with me this whole time know that 60 is a comically low volume of offensive action for Russia. Now, obviously, one big attack is worth many little attacks. But as we've talked about, Russia struggles to gather the forces necessary to launch a real meaningful offensive. That requires, of course, collecting your soldiers into one place, and they simply can't do that. Ukrainian intelligence and reconnaissance is too good, and without trained troops and decent mechanization, they can't launch, right? They're stuck having these pretty low effect attacks. In fact, it's gotten so bad that even General Mark Milley, who's usually pretty taciturn about Ukraine issues and especially has been him and other senior U.S. government officials have expressed a lot of reservations about the Ukrainian fighting and decision to fight in Bakhmut. So what he says recently in a interview with CNN, referring to Wagner mercenaries, he says they're conducting combat operations right now in Bakhmut primarily. He says about 6,000 or so actual mercenaries. He's probably describing properly trained troops, actual combat troops, and another 20 or 30,000 recruits that they get, many of whom come from prisons. He added that the Russians are suffering an enormous amount of casualties in the Bakhmut area, and the Ukrainians are inflicting a lot of death and destruction. He says the Ukrainians are doing a very effective area defense. And an area defense, for those of you not versed in NATO stuff, an area defense is like it sounds. It's defending an area. A linear defense would be holding, for example, a single line, like, say, the Bakhmutka. But an area defense is, again, allowing combat to take place in a larger area. So we have these front lines, but when we look at the area where combat's taking place, you can see that actually a large portion, maybe even up to 50% of the city, is contested. And this is what an area defense is going to look like. The enemy can get into that area, but you're denying it to them and inflicting casualties and counterattacking. So that's a probably best way to think of an area defense. And the very effective area defense, he says, and it's been proven very costly to the Russians. For the last 21 days, Russians have not made any progress whatsoever in and around Bakhmut. Meaningful progress. They've again taken small blocks of the city, but as he points out, he calls it a slaughter fest. This is very strong language for a guy who's pretty demurred. He said they're getting hammered in the vicinity of Bakhmut, and Ukrainians have fought very, very well. Of course, it acknowledges that Bilohorivka, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marinka are the primary targets of the Russian forces, and it acknowledges again this is I think a day old that there have been 48 attacks in these sectors. Again, of really low volume. Even the UK Ministry of Defense is acknowledging that Russia itself and even their media seems to recognize that these levels of casualties are just not sustainable, and that Russia is preparing to start a major recruitment campaign with up to 400,000 additional troops. Russia says the campaign is a volunteer call for professional personnel rather than a new mobilization. But as they know, the distinction will probably be blurred, just like it was last time when regional authorities coerce, cajole, and force eligible men to sign up in order to meet their recruitment targets. And as we've heard from other videos, once they sign up, they can't really get out. They're using this volunteer model probably to minimize domestic dissent. No one wants to believe their son or daughter or father or son or father is going to get recruited into this effort by force. And even if it's true, Russia needs to at least keep the idea that it's not alive. But rebuilding Russia's combat power in Ukraine will require more than just personnel. Russia needs munitions and military equipment that it has available. This is why it's been working so hard to try to get China and Iran to support them. And as Zelensky may have pointed out, these other countries, these other belligerents may want to see Russia offer some sort of proof of effectiveness, proof that their support isn't going to be a waste. And taking Bakhmut and Avdiivka is probably pretty important to Russia. But again, it's just not clear that they have the personnel to do it. Because remember, training 400,000 troops, that's a new army. That's, I think, like 50% of the total U.S. active duty force. They're talking about standing up. So they need a huge cadre of trainers. They need a huge number of logistics personnel, weapons, body armor, munitions. It's going to take years, just like the U.S. military, right? We miss our recruitment by 15,000 people, and it's considered like a national security crisis because of how hard it is to train hundreds of thousands of people. So you end up in this situation, right? It's a problem for the U.S. So you can imagine this problem, even if you were to cut training by 2/3, 400,000 people is so resource intensive to turn them from people into combat soldiers. And it's not clear that they have their reserve element, right? Combat trained troops that they can bring up and quickly get back up to speed. That pool seems like it's already been exhausted. One other note that I think is really interesting and probably we should take with a heavy grain of salt. Ukrainian Minister of Defense said that their forces may be planning to launch a counteroffensive in April or May, depending on weather. This is an interview with an Estonian news outlet. Said the Ukrainian staff might decide to use recently received Leopard 2s in a spring counterattack. Leopard 2 and Challenger 2 tanks made it to Ukraine in late March. And U.S. officials are accelerating their deployment of Abrams and Patriots. But again, just because it's there, it's a long way from being able to be used. And chances are the first couple tanks are going to be used to train crews. The last thing you want is to have the only guy who knows how to drive a Leopard, become a casualty early in an offensive. You want those people who are experts. The best thing they can do is train crews, train backup crews to the backup crews. Get more and more people experienced on these new armored systems. Anyway, guys, the last thing, of course, as always, you guys know I'm out here getting canceled by Patreon. YouTube has become more and more common, has more and more commonly, taken off, demonetized my content. So I've launched my own site, combatvetnews.com. Combatvetnews.com, right? We're covering military, national security, geopolitics. All my YouTube videos are available for free. But if you want to support the channel and get access to some exclusive content, you want to join the members only section. It's exactly like the Patreon, but obviously every tier is less expensive because Patreon doesn't need to take a cut. And the members only content we can check out all the videos that YouTube won't let us post. These are the GoPro footage, the drone footage, the things that give us the insight into the fighting that's happening on the ground. We're dropping new videos all the time, at least once a week, but I'm trying to do like 3 a week. And of course, we're dropping in the old Patreon archives as well. So if you want to support me, link is in the description. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you in the next one.